Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic of today's webinar is Microfinancing and Locally Led Development, a Scalable Model for Resilient Power in Rural Communities. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group, and we are very excited to have guest speakers with us today from the Solar Village project and Solar United Neighbors. Before we pass it over, I'd like to go over some webinar logistics. If you'd like to minimize the webinar viewing panel, you can do so by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also click on the orange arrow to expand the webinar console. And one of the things that you might like to do during the webinar is to submit your questions and comments. We'll be saving 15 minutes after the presentation for a Q&A with the audience, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. But to make sure that we get to your question, make sure to type it in when you think of it. Don't wait until the end. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. Slides and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you via email within 48 hours. You can also find all these materials posted on our website at cleanenergygroup.org/webinars. This URL is where we post all of our upcoming and archived webinars, so it's a good one to bookmark. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today's webinar, my colleague Anna Adamsson.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zareen, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. It's in a topic that I am especially interested in. Financing, innovative financing models, always want to learn more about them, so very excited for today. Zareen, I think it's still on that first intro slide, at least for me. Could you advance to perfect? Thank you. So this webinar is a presentation of Clean Energy Group. We are a nonprofit headquartered out of Vermont, but we work across the country, plus in DC and Puerto Rico. Today's webinar will be focusing on the first two project areas on the left, climate resilience and community health, and advancing the equitable deployment of solar plus storage. We also have two other main focus areas, one on energy storage and the flexible demand, working to increase grid resilience there, as well as looking at the impacts of fossil fuels and how we can replace them in a just way that benefits everyone. Next slide, please. The Resilient Power Project is one of our project areas, umbrella project areas, and this project focuses on building the foundation for energy resilient communities by advancing, like I said, the equitable deployment of solar and battery storage in historically underserved and marginalized communities. Next slide, please. And within that, we have a small grants program for community institutions that are looking to explore what solar and battery storage can look like for them. It's a pre-development early stage assistance program, no cost to folks, just wanting to provide information and help folks get connected with information, early stage information, so that they can go use that and be able to develop these projects, get them installed, and reap the resilience, the economic, and the environmental benefits of locally sited solar and battery storage. Next slide, please. The Technical Assistance Fund, we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. This small grants program was funded 10 years ago in 2014, and to celebrate this, we have a run of different resources that we're publishing, blog posts highlighting some of our early awardees and the projects that they've gotten installed in the past 10 years, as well as bringing projects like Solar Village Project and their innovative financing model to this webinar so that we can learn about other models across the country and really, take the next 10 years towards what solar and battery storage development can look like in the next 10 years. So stay tuned for a lot of resources over the next couple of months coming out from us. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have one more small grants program, the Resilient Power Leadership Initiative. It's a capacity building grant for communities that are looking to build resilient power programs in their communities, whether that's workforce related, whether that's education and awareness building related. We are really open to how communities need to build capacity to advance resilient power in their communities. And I think the next slide is bios. So oh, my bad. This is the impact of our programs over the last 10 years, over 1.5 million granted, supporting a bunch of communities and community facilities across the country. Next slide, please. Perfect, now we're there. Webinar bios, as Zareen had said, I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'll be getting off the screen shortly and only joining back in for the Q&A at the end. But first up, we have Joe Kselman, board chair of the Solar Village Project. Joe is the founder and executive director of the Solar Village Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating energy poverty and climate change. Based in Maryland and operating predominantly in India, with expansions in Puerto Rico and aspirations for broader reach in the global South, Joe leads the organization's efforts in making renewable energy accessible to underserved communities. Joe holds a bachelor's degree from Indiana University. You can learn more about Joe. We have a handout PDF attached to this webinar. You can go there and read their full bio now or at the end of the webinar, whenever you want, it'll be available. Next up, we have Ruth McElroy Amundsen, treasurer at the Solar Village Project. Ruth received her bachelor's in physics from Stanford and has dual engineering master's degrees from the University of Michigan. Ruth recently retired from NASA, but she is still very busy. Ruth has started a Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund named Norfolk Solar Fund for installing solar on businesses and nonprofits in low-income neighborhoods at no cost. She also founded a small woman-owned business, Norfolk Solar, and runs Solar Sunspots LLC. Both of these organizations focus on deploying solar in underserved and low-income neighborhoods. Again, you can learn more about that in the handout in today's webinar file. Lastly, we have David Ortiz, Puerto Rico Program Director at Solar United Neighbors. David is the program director, like I said, and in that role, David leads all local and federal organizing and advocacy campaigns related to Puerto Rico. David was co-founder of the Youth Development Program at La Alianza Hispana Incorporated in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and the Young Civic Leaders Program at MassVote in Boston, and the El Puente Puerto Rico, an organization that fights for environmental and social justice in San Juan, Puerto Rico. David holds a bachelor's of business administration from Cambridge College and a master of public policy from Tufts University. Yes, that is it. I was just going to repeat that last sentence, but I will hold off there. Perfect. Thank you all again so much. Please feel free to start putting in questions in the Q&A box on that control panel as you think of them. We'll be organizing it as the presentations go through, and then we'll get to that Q&A session at the end, about 15 minutes or so. So please think of questions and put them in during the presentation. Amazing. I will hand it over to the team to start on the presentations.
Thank you very much, Anna, and I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Let's see if I can get this to work. And let's present. So welcome everybody. Can everyone hear me before I start here?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Welcome to our webinar on empowering rural communities with solar plus storage. Today we'll explore how Solar Village Project harnesses solar to enhance health, education, and economic development in underserved areas. We'll talk about our journey from launching initiatives in India and our expansion into Puerto Rico. And we'll also touch on our microfinance model and also the impactful role of solar in disaster resilience. And we will also talk about solar and women in the workforce and our strategic approach to fundraising and engaging investors. So kind of a lot to unravel there, but I'll try to make this clear and succinct. I'm going to try to do it this way. So the history of SVP is one of kind of a personal journey. In 2014, I found myself in India, and I was in a off-grid, untouchable caste village that had zero access to electricity. And I had been working with solar in my day job, and so I decided to power the school. So I went back 6 months later and did that. But I realized the village still had no power and was using kerosene lanterns, and so I wanted to do something. So I did an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign and raised enough money to distribute solar lanterns for the whole village. My wife and I went back 6 months later and did that project, and that was how Solar Village Project was born. We continued using that model for a few years, where we would raise funds from donors and then go to a remote village and distribute solar lanterns. And eventually we partnered with the Johns Hopkins School for, it's actually an initiative for sustainable energy policy to do impact evaluations, kind of randomized control trials to really get a better understanding of, how impactful our interventions are and were. And from there, we kind of branched into doing solar arrays for schools and clinics because we didn't feel like solar lanterns were the best solution to the problem. They're great. They're a great product. They're cost effective, but it's not really all that sustainable, and it doesn't really fall under the category of sustainable development because these products have a shelf life of a couple of years, and then basically they go in the waste bin. And so schools and clinics proved to be a more long-term, really focused, impactful intervention because these solar arrays that we install, we maintain them and they run for years. And critical infrastructure like schools and clinics have a huge impact on these rural communities. All of the ones that we serve have very unreliable access to the grid, especially in India where the grid can go down for 12 to 14 to 18 hours a day in many of these places. So reliability is a huge thing, and that's why solar plus storage with battery is so key. And so the impact of these projects is kind of manifold, but we're looking at health and education as the key drivers for these main flagship programs. You can't have sustainable development or socioeconomic growth without proper education and proper healthcare, and you really can't have those without reliable access to electricity. So that's why we focus on what we do. We also do have programs that are doing solar water filtration and pumping. As I mentioned a few minutes ago or a minute ago, is the women's education platform where we're partnering with a university or a training program in India that's really famous for this to train women to be technicians, which gives a lot of empowerment in these rural communities where the patriarchy is very entrenched. And we also have like a solar street lighting program because light at night is a critical element for safety. So there's a kind of an ecosystem of programs which cover microfinance, lighting, education and health, and empowerment, which really has the overall impact of sustainable development. And of course, we have since expanded into Puerto Rico, and we do hope to move further into the global south, especially in Africa, where there's a demonstrable need. So the impact of what we do, as I said, is really about increased access to education. With reliable electricity, the students have extended study hours, a more comfortable learning environment. India and Puerto Rico too can be really hot, obviously, and also access to digital tools because in the 21st century, digital is everything, and having access to a computer can really open up the world to young students who need to get a modern education. Improve access to healthcare services. Again, it's a critical element of modern healthcare is reliable power, vaccine storage, blood storage, healthcare equipment from incubators and maternity wards to nebulizers, oxygen concentrators. Any modern healthcare equipment, obviously. And healthcare doesn't wait for the grid to be active or on for disasters to happen. So really reliable power with solar storage in schools and clinics has a huge impact. And so it all goes back into community resilience. When you have solar and backup, you have uninterrupted power, and uninterrupted power is what provides this opportunity for quality of life, expansion and socioeconomic advancement, and just a better reality for those who are most in need. The expansion into Puerto Rico happened post Hurricane Maria and Irma. We got a lot of requests for support, and so we started shipping solar lights to various organizations and individuals on the island. And then we also partnered with a couple of local organizations that were setting up these kind of grassroots community centers. I guess they're called CAMs. David would probably be able to give more information on how these all kind of self-organize, but they're mutual aid societies who responded in the wake of the hurricane, given the lack of the central response that was needed. And so they started taking care of themselves. We worked with them to power some of the community centers in these more remote locations. And then just in the past year, we decided to establish a permanent program thanks to our partners with Sun, partnership with Sun and David, who has made this new program possible. The partnership is really the key to all this, because as we've learned from our time in India, having a presence on the ground, either in partnership or with their own staff, makes all the difference. And so through Sun and David's hard efforts, we've been able to start our new program there. And I'm going to turn it over to David now, because he can tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to work with Joe and SVP. We met up early 2023. I think it was March of 2023, and had a great meeting with Joe and Ruth and another colleague of theirs that also works with SVP. And we just saw an opportunity there to support each other mutually with the very same objectives and goals, right? Which is energy resilience for folks in Puerto Rico, reducing the dependency, right, on fossil fuels, and empowering communities. But there were so many groups that after Hurricane Maria really mobilized their communities, really organized themselves. And they also saw that there were challenges to community resiliency. And that transition to renewables was going to be key to all of this. And we thought that this was another great partnership for us to work together to get more resources to folks in Puerto Rico and help in that transition. Next slide, please. So we began talking, like I said, early in 2023. And we started to discuss the numerous groups that we have as partners island-wide. And Joe had mentioned that the SVP really focuses on health institutions, on educational institutions, community organizations. And so we developed a list of groups and reached out to these groups that are groups like the camps that Joe mentioned earlier, that play a vital role in their community with providing all types of services. And in that, we identified one group that things started to sort of align with really quickly, and that was El Centro Buen Pastor. Next slide, please. El Centro Buen Pastor is it has three sort of ways in which it works. It's a center for retired nuns that are part of the Archdiocese of San Juan. These are nuns that have dedicated their life to service and now depend on sister nuns to provide and support them in their later years, and they also depend on medical equipment. So this center serves as a space for retired nuns. It also has a therapy clinic that provides mental therapy services for over 2,000 people annually, island-wide. And these are folks that depend on these services. And then thirdly, it acts as a retreat center for many middle schools and high schools nearby, for other NGOs and for groups coming from the US to lead their activities, to participate in collective visioning and collective work. And they work really close with not only their immediate community, but many other communities island-wide. And for us, we saw it as a great partner in this first project that we were doing together. And sure enough, we were, SVP was able to identify funding, and we broke it into two phases. Phase one meant having an 8-kilowatt system that would provide clean energy, specifically for the center where the retired nuns were, because we identified that as the prime sort of need to begin with. And then the second phase would be for the therapy clinic, which we hope to start doing this year. Right now, Sister Vidalis, who is the the executive director there, is so excited. We communicate on a regular basis. In about 2 weeks, we're going to be doing the ribbon cutting event and celebrating with the community and with the sisters. The Archbishop will also be there in support of this amazing achievement for the center. And that wouldn't have happened without the work and the effort of SPP and Solar United Neighbors. And we're just, glad to be a part of this. I'm going to pass it on to Ruth now.
All right, thanks a lot, David. Definitely appreciate it. I'm going to move back to our work in India with an initiative that we're really proud of that we're starting up, and that is training women to be part of the solar workforce and help do the maintenance and also the sales for the systems that we've already deployed, and also moving forward to sell more systems. And we've teamed up with Barefoot College, and we have some grants that have allowed us to start up this training program. So these are training programs that are tailored to women and helping them with the technical skills to help with maintenance and with installation, like learning how to read a voltmeter and soldering and things that will help them be comfortable going into the field to do repairs on installations. And it's just huge to give women these skills and opportunities to have their own career and their own employment. It really helps with the family income. If it's a dual income family, you really empower them by having the woman making their own salary. And of course, all the girls are seeing the women getting jobs and getting trained, and you're inspiring the next generation. If any of you have read the books Drawdown and Regeneration, which are about what are the most impactful ways to affect climate change, educating girls and women is one of the best. You give them a way to understand their power in the world. They can decrease family size. They have their own power, and it helps them have equality in the workplace, and also just challenges the stereotypes in these places that are definitely male dominated. So really excited to get that started. It's going to start small, but I really think that it can have a lot of impact as we move forward. And if the first pilot goes well, we'll be looking for more grants to train more women in this field. Next slide, Joe. So the things that Joe described as far as putting solar on clinics and schools are things that we do with grants and with donations from donors, charitable donations. Moving into homes, we are doing that with microfinancing, where for a home or a small business, you're offering them a loan where they're paying you back as they have the benefit of the solar. And our repayment terms are really flexible. It's tailored to the borrower's income, what they're planning on doing with it. And all of these systems are paired with a battery so that you can be storing the solar energy, obviously for use at night or use when you need it, and also for when the grid goes out. We have done 150 houses already, and we're looking to really create a self-sustaining program where we can continue to do homes and small businesses with this microfinance program. Next slide. So things that it does when you have microfinance and you're enabling people to get that reliable and sustainable power, you're changing the lives of the people in that household or in that business, but then you're also transforming, maybe the livelihood of someone who's working there, and really allowing them to see in the community that they can start making their own power. And it's enhancing quality of life. The kind of things that Joe talked about, that many of the homes are burning kerosene or dung in the home to have light at night. So for a child to study at night, it's very costly for the family because they're burning kerosene, and it's also extremely unhealthy for the family. So having a small solar system for a home and allowing the child to read, or anyone in the family to read at night, and be able to charge your cell phone and be able to run a fan. As Joe said, a lot of these places are really hot all the time, and just to have the flexibility, even if the power's out, to know that you have your own power and you can run a fan and make your own home more comfortable, is just huge. And by using microfinance to do this, we're facilitating getting solar in there and promoting the sustainability, but we're using investor money to do it so it can be a self-sustaining program and not have to depend on donors or on getting grants, but it can really stand on its own. Next slide. So when we approach investors for this, we're really highlighting both the social impact and the financial return. This is not a hedge fund where you're making 20% year over year. This is for investors who are interested in both making an impact as far as environmental justice, social justice, and climate change, but also being able to get a financial return. And in our outreach, we're showing that we have done this already, that it scales, and that we have positive outcomes. And one of the big reasons we have positive outcomes is what Joe talked about, is going back and making sure that the systems are in good repair. So we're not just installing a couple solar panels and walking away. We're going out there and putting in a system and making sure we have the maintenance and the support available so that people's systems continue to work for years. And the investors are providing that crucial funding for us, and then the communities are benefiting. So next slide. So this is really a call to action for anyone who would be interested in participating in this. We're looking in general for investments around $25,000 per investor. And with that, you get a 4% ROI, as well as knowing that you have aided these communities that are in need. And we are very close to our goal, which was to have $250,000 to start the microfund to really make it self-sustaining. And one thing that really helps is we already have boots on the ground in India. We already have the people and the infrastructure there set up to make these sales happen and to do the maintenance. And so it is an impact investment model where it's not only about profit, is also about our purpose. And our purpose is to target energy poverty and climate change in these rural areas, and being able to give them sustainable energy, solar plus battery, and reducing the carbon emissions, but also helping the quality of life. So if anyone listening would like to invest in this, we'll have contact info at the end, but also give some thought to whether you're part of an organization that might want to help out. We've had churches invest some of their foundation money in it, or also, anyone that might have a small amount that they're willing to invest in something that has a big impact but makes a smaller profit. And then I'm going to pass it over to Joe to talk about how we're going to expand our work.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, David. So yeah, I think that, as you talked about the impact in terms of what we've done in India and our expansion into Puerto Rico, there's also a lot of opportunity to do similar programs here in the States. This slide, I think, is really interesting, and it's from the Rocky Mountain Institute, and it shows just how real the problem of energy poverty is in the States itself. I think that, this is something that isn't commonly recognized, but I know it's a huge problem in a lot of Indian reservations where the grid is not always even built out yet. But even if the grid is there in some of these rural communities, the reliability might not be there. It probably is, but even if it is, they might not have the economic means to pay their power bills, and that can be a huge stressor, and that's just not great at all. And so there's a lot of opportunities to utilize a microfinance model, maybe a subsidized model, that would allow low-income households in rural areas and in places like Puerto Rico, where home ownership is a barrier to some of these subsidized installations, where a small system, maybe 1 to 2 kilowatts with a battery backup, could provide a huge benefit at a relatively low cost. I think like the average cost per watt installed is $3, maybe a little bit more. So $3,000 to $5,000 or $6,000 could provide a home with something really substantial: refrigeration, fans, cell phones. If the grid goes down or they can't pay their power bill, they shouldn't have to worry about, keeping on the bare essentials, being able to contact the outside world and keeping your food perishable or your perishable food fresh. These are all, really critical things that no one should have to go without. And so I think that, there's a case to be made for a microfinance program in the states here themselves, and it's not just for the global south. Again, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of identifying, how to build the program, but that's something that we have some experience with and understand, at least in our own context, and I think it is transferable. We know that there are some foundational steps that can be taken. Like with us, we always do these needs assessments first. We've learned from experience that the best way to really identify a meaningful opportunity in terms of a project is to go out there and engage with the community, talk to the people in the nearby villages, talk to the schools, talk to the clinics, and let them tell you what the problems are and what's needed. And then you design a system and a response around that, and then you measure the impact over time. And again, local partnerships. I think our partnership with Sun is a prime example of this, and we have similar partnerships in India. And obviously, with things like Solar for All and the programs that the Biden administration has rolled out, there's a lot more opportunities now available than there ever have been. And so through these things, and also resources like the Technical Assistance Fund that the Clean Energy Group talked about at the beginning, and just talking to other organizations like SVP, Sun, and Ruth, who has done this extensively in her own backyard, means that there is so much that can be done. And it's just a matter of kind of logistics, really, more than anything else. And so I encourage those who are active in the solar space to maybe consider looking in these more, I guess, need-focused communities, which are really all over the states, and doing some of these assessments and figuring out how we can support them in a more meaningful way at a relatively low cost. The current needs for our organization and in general are just the financial support to fund the projects that we're doing and future projects. As Ruth mentioned, we're trying to close our investment funding for phase 2 of our micro fund. Equipment donations are always great, and I think that volunteering is also a huge value add for our organization and really any organization. People who have helped me over the years on the volunteer basis have really shaped this organization. And it goes across all levels, from helping me with figuring out how to do proper bookkeeping and website development and system design. So there's just anyone who has an interest has some kind of skill that can be really helpful in building out capacity and making our organization and other organizations' efforts more impactful. And obviously collaboration is great, like I just mentioned. And just spreading the word about energy poverty and climate change and how those two things are really closely intertwined. You can't get rid of energy poverty without getting rid of climate change at the same time, and you can't do vice versa. And so I think there is just a critical need to address both of these things in tandem. We have a lot of great videos about our work, especially in India on our YouTube channel. You can always check out our Facebook and our website as well. We're going to be putting some more stuff together for Puerto Rico in the not too distant future. So there's more things that people can learn about our program there. But there's so much to do, and I'm really excited about what's in store for the future. And I'm really grateful for everyone attending here and for Clean Energy Group and David and Ruth for showing up today and talking about the bright future that is solar and plus storage. And I think that's about all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe, David, and Ruth. That was a really insightful presentation. And I think we're ready now for Q&A. So, Joe, I think you're sharing your slides. You can go ahead and turn that off if you'd like. Perfect. And these slides will be available on our website along with the webinar recording shortly, so that you all will have access to that email address if you all have any follow-up questions or want to share any resources with them about how they can expand or contribute to their microfinancing model. But the first question I have for you all is, what have been some of the lessons learned through this experience? Specifically in Puerto Rico, and how do those differ from the lessons learned that you all learned in that first effort in India?
David, why don't you start?
I think some of the lessons that we've learned are, of course, right, there's always the importance of storage, right? Having enough storage to support the home when, say, a hurricane comes or some other major event takes place, right? How to manage that storage has been another important lesson. Sometimes you don't, because folks start to worry about the fact that a hurricane is coming, they may use their storage beforehand, and then when the storm comes, they can't weather the storm long enough. And I think that's another critical lesson. And then finally, just the amount of need. We really talk about Puerto Rico being sort of the example for the rest of the world, but we're still a long way from being halfway there, right? We're still a long way from being 3/4 of the way there. There's still ways that we have to figure out to fill those gaps for folks that can't access a solar system for themselves. And I think that resiliency hubs are one way that we're able to do that. Joe, I'm going to pass it to you to talk about India.
Yeah, and I think that my experience in Puerto Rico has been kind of been much more accessible in a lot of ways because of David's outreach and our learnings from India, which is basically you just have to do a lot of outreach first. And luckily, David is a fixture there and knows so many people and was able to facilitate so many meetings with potential stakeholders. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that we actually in the process, we identified probably 4 or 5 like really high impact projects that we want to find funding for, and that's what we're working on. But I think the challenge now is how do we find the funding to do these projects like Buen Pastor, which will have a huge impact on community centers and some of these churches, and really build this resilience hub so that people in need have this resource. And so we borrowed from the India playbook, which is do this outreach, which kind of fast forwarded how we were able to identify projects because we learned from trial and error. But now we have a great set of projects that are shovel ready, and we just need support to make them happen.
I guess I would add, as far as the lessons learned, the criticality of providing maintenance. There's a lot of solar installers that have great visions and they go over there and install solar, but there's no follow-up. And so then the solar water pump stops working, and it's such a new technology to these areas that there's no resources. There's no one to help fix it, and no one really understands it. So I think the criticality of having continuous support and maintenance, and then also having the people on the ground, like having the India infrastructure set up and having people really there to provide that support. I think those 2 things are really critical, and I feel like we did learn some of that in India.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, the maintenance, the presence, and the ongoing routine maintenance is just a critical element.
Joe and Ruth, can I add one last thing there, and Anna? I think we're also going to start to see, and this has been interesting, we're going to start to see the word resiliency hub change to resiliency networks. It's amazing how through the resiliency hubs, we've seen individuals who have solar on their homes say, can I support the hub and offer my home, and start to grow networks. And what was once a resiliency hub that we thought would provide service to a community is actually now unifying other folks with solar to provide clean energy to other folks in the community that don't have access to that. And I think that that's also been interesting.
That's wonderful. And that's a great segue into my next question, which is you all have focused on single family residences as well as on health clinics and schools in the past. Do you see that based on your needs assessments that you've done in Puerto Rico and India and just through your work, do you think that that's the direction that you'll all continue to move in, or are there any other facilities that you see that folks want to implement solar and battery storage on?
That's a great question. I see critical infrastructure as schools and clinics, hospitals being, always at the center. But I haven't seen other, I guess, requests for support for different kinds of facilities, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. And I think we just haven't looked necessarily. And so I think that, I think critical infrastructure, like in community centers and schools and clinics and churches, places where the community gathers, but it's not limited to that. And so I think David's point is really awesome and fascinating. And so I think there's opportunities to grow from there, really beyond that core focus on those institutions.
Yeah, and I agree with what Joe said. And if there's one thing we've learned is that there isn't one way to do it. What we learned is that you need a diverse way of doing this work, right? So that everyone could have access to clean energy, and so that we start to really fill in those gaps and that no one is left behind in the process.
Awesome. So thinking about your projects in Puerto Rico and your needs assessments and community outreach engagement there, how has the community been receptive to solar and battery storage? Have they been excited? Have there been any concerns that were raised? What was the kind of reaction that folks had when you're first engaging folks and talking about ideas and hearing what their goals and needs are?
Joe, you want me to take that?
Please.
So when we first had the conversation with Sister Vidalis, right, Joe, I can't tell you how many times she mentioned, how thankful she was for this opportunity. And how many times she mentioned how she's prayed for this opportunity to happen. It was really fulfilling to see them. I saw them not too long ago because I go there frequently to check up on them and see how the system's working, and just seeing their smiles every day. I happened to come in a day when one of the schools was using the space, one of the local schools was using the space, so it was filled with elementary kids. And just seeing the sisters there bringing food to the kids, I mean, it was just wonderful. And it just reiterated how fulfilling this work is, how amazing this work is. There isn't a day that she doesn't call me to talk about how the system is working, or she sends us a picture of her software and what her software is telling her. It's really exciting. Every day is a new excitement. But there is one thing that was interesting outside of all of that I wasn't expecting. And that was the day that Sister Vidalis reached out to me and said, Dave, I just realized that I have a new trauma. And the trauma is tied to energy. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, I expect the electricity to go, and it doesn't. And I have that fear. And then when I see the community around me goes dark, that fear comes back, and I expect it to go, but I still have energy. And she slowly has actually started to realize that she's coming out of a trauma that she did not know she had, because she had gotten used to losing electricity 3 or 4 times a week.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that story. And along that same lines, you all had talked about the energy burden that folks have, high electricity bills. Could you speak more to the financial impact of these systems on folks' bottom lines on their electricity bills, and what those savings look like for folks?
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, we're talking about relatively small installations. Ruth, I think you do 10 kilowatts on average for your installs. But we're talking about relatively small systems. So this might not power an entire home or an apartment, but it could reduce that stress that David was talking about. If my power goes out because I can't afford my bill, or because the grid went down because of a storm, which is only getting worse, can I at least have the basic necessities in place? So there is some cost savings because, if a small home is usually, I don't know the recent numbers on kilowatt hours per month, but if we can generate 2 to 3 kilowatt hours per day through a small installation, that will save some over time, and every penny saved is a penny earned, and especially a low-income household. But I think it's also about the stress reduction, and we see this in India too, where a lot of people have that similar trauma, where it's just such a common thing that the grid is just so unreliable in the global south that there's a really high demand for reliable power because of that stress factor. So it's not just economic, it's also a mental health issue. But you can't take away the economic factor either, because solar in terms of kilowatt hours generated is actually cheaper. And now, of course, the upfront cost for a small system is high. So it's not, a direct linear, savings, but in the end, it's a more holistic savings. It's mental health. It is and a financial component.
Yeah, I could say from my experience, I like to say two things. One, we're a middle income family. We don't have our son living at home anymore. We still have our 12-year-old daughter. But I can tell you that our electricity bill rivals what we pay for our daughter's education. During the year when it's not so hot, say not when it's not July, June, or August, then the bill could be anywhere between $350 and $400. And then come summertime, it could go anywhere between $500 to $600 easily. That's what we're talking about here for cost. So you can see how people could struggle to pay that. We both work, and that's how we're able to do this, but it's really hard. In the case of Buen Pastor, we're talking about an opportunity for them to have a savings. Their bill would be somewhere near the same ballpark. And now those savings that they now have, they can actually use that money to put into the services that they're providing the community. So there's an added benefit there to the community because they're no longer paying that $300-400 bill. They could actually take that money and provide more therapy services, do more activities for the school, provide more food for the community. The benefits are incredible.
And even if it's not a directly financial benefit, I think if we put it on a small business as part of this microfinance, we're not only doing homes, we might be doing a home where someone's running their business or doing a small business. And that might be something that allows them to actually sell a product. It's something that actually might make their business successful. If they're making something with a machine, they're not going to do too well if they only have 2 hours of power a day that's at 2 a.m. Like for them to have that reliable power to enable them to do whatever the manufacturing process is, whether it's a pump or a lathe or something else, might enable their business at all and allow them to make a profit. So it doesn't only have to be the electricity savings, it can also be the enabling power for a business.
That's so great. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing the different kinds of impacts that these systems are having, how the broad range of different impacts as well as the depth of those impacts is just really, really great to hear. So we have a question about whether the projects that you've worked on that have installed solar+storage, if you found that any of those folks have been using these systems and making a business out of selling power to others. So I think it would be helpful if you could talk more about what sorts of loads are being covered by solar+storage and the sizing of the system, how you think about that. And I mean, if that's ever happened, if anyone's tried to sell their electricity, or if it's really just for, their own sustaining their own electricity needs.
That's an interesting question. I think it's something that we haven't seen yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it in the future. For the schools and clinics that we've done in India, we typically just do a basic load survey, and the electricity use in rural India in these facilities is relatively low compared to what we use here in the West. And so typically they have a grid sanctioned load on a meter ranging between 2 and 5 kilowatts. And so what we typically do, and for a small school it's 1 kilowatt, we try to match the size of our array to what the grid sanctioned load is. And that way we know that even though that meter is only running about 50% of the time at best, even when it's not our solar is there, and usually solar is generating anyway. So we have data loggers deployed on about 30 of our installations, and across those 30 installations, 80% of the power being consumed comes from solar, and so 20%, a relatively small percentage, and it varies across installations. Some clinics are 100% power, and some schools are, and some are like around 80% on the lower end. But yeah, we haven't seen anyone really trying to distribute the power. On the microfinance side, we have a few that are running small businesses from their homes with 1 and 2 kilowatt installations. And so they have small shops essentially where they sell cold drinks and things like that. And so I could imagine a situation where they start selling power to their neighbors, and so that would be something that they did to increase their business or grow their business, kind of in a very entrepreneurial way. But we haven't seen it yet.
Cool. There's a question here kind of focusing on the investor side of things. How do you construct a timeline for when folks will get that 4% return on investment? How do you think about that? Is that on the first round of investments that you've made? Is there a positive net return? Can you characterize that a little bit more?
Right. We have a projection that we break even actually within the first year, and then it should be about 18 to 24 months, at least based on the financial model. And we have a seasoned CFO who's reviewed this, so we're pretty confident that it would work out, assuming we can hit some benchmarks. So about 18 to 24 months for the first interest payment. And then the life of it's a loan, so we're doing it's kind of a debt equity. It's not really equity in the LLC we're spinning up. So it's a 12-year loan with a 4% return annually.
Okay, super. Going on the broader picture of things, could you speak to any of the regulatory burdens or barriers that you've experienced, of course in Puerto Rico, but also potentially in India as well?
Yeah, so I'll touch on Puerto Rico real briefly. We had a discussion and a grant application with a foundation, and we went back and forth a lot, and we got pretty far, but in the end they decided not to proceed with funding one of our projects in Puerto Rico because they had a really negative experience the one time they had tried to do a project there in the past. And so, they got burned. The project never went live, and they invested like $100,000. And so as much as they were really excited about what we were presenting and they were really considering it, in the end, they didn't feel quite ready to go back into Puerto Rico because of the issues that they had. And so I told them, we have experience with this internationally, and we have, a really great partner in Sun. And so let's go back and revisit this in the future and see if you guys are more comfortable. But David, he's been, working there and knows these issues much better than I.
Yeah, it's like Joe said, and there are all sorts of challenges that we're facing, right? But the one thing that I could say is that different to many of the states, permitting is not a big issue in Puerto Rico. So it's actually a lot easier for you to go solar in Puerto Rico than it is in other places. And normally you have access to net metering within 2 to 3 months. Where I saw a presentation not too long ago by Luma, which is the local grid here, where they said the average was 16 days. But what we're seeing with the influx of federal dollars and still the market growing is that it's taking about 2 to 3 months, in some cases even 3 months full, to go to do net metering. What we are concerned about is that the FOMB recently challenged the bill, Law 10, Law 10, that extended net metering through 2030 with an evaluation in 2031. And they're requesting that the governor either cancel or amend the net metering Law 10. For us, that's a huge concern. It's not something you should be doing in a moment or in an industry that's helping to grow the economy in Puerto Rico, which has been in a crisis for years. It's just not a smart move. And we're seeing the number of installations because there is no IRA in Puerto Rico. There's no access to IRA in Puerto Rico. You have to be a nonprofit, and that nonprofit has to be based in the US. So all we have is net metering. And if you take that away, then outside of really wanting to do it because you want clean energy, there's really or energy that you could depend on, there's no other benefit to have solar unless you have net metering.
Gotcha.
But Joe, as far as regulatory barriers in India, I think just the whole process of setting up the Indian subsidiary and getting the banking set up, to me, that was eye-opening. I had no idea how hard it would be to set up an Indian bank account and pay things out of there. And I feel like now that we have all that set up, that's a huge benefit for us to continue to work in India. But it wasn't exactly a regulatory barrier, just a paperwork and time barrier, but it was definitely a lot of work and a lot of time.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just, Ruth is exactly right. The bureaucratic red tape of establishing a nonprofit in India, it was pretty onerous. It took us a whole year from start to finish, but we were able to complete it, and that was a huge deal.
Awesome. So with just under 4 minutes left, I want to ask one final question of all you, and that's just the next step. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary here at Clean Energy Group for our fund, so I'm curious what you think the next 10 years for resilient power look like for you all, or just in the immediate next year. What's something that excites you? What's something that you're looking forward to? And I know that's a big question, so whoever's ready first.
I love the microgrid idea where, and you were talking about people selling power to each other. I think this thing where you can set up a spider web in a single village, and then if they want to watch football at someone's house, everybody, kind of sends their power over to Fred's house, and you're going to watch TV over there. Or, if someone's having a party, they can have the lights and the music at their house, where a community can really share power. And then if someone is in need, where they're ill or they need refrigeration, then again the community can help out. Like, I'm really excited about the microgrid idea, and also just as far as the U.S. at least, very excited about just the amount of money in the IRA and all the bills that the Biden administration has put through that are helping renewable energy and storage. And I think I hope we can capitalize on those and keep moving forward.
Can I go next, Joe, so you could close it out?
Yeah.
Awesome. I guess for me, it's just, I second what Ruth just said. And I also think that, that energy, that the solar systems become more accessible, that they become cheaper, that storage becomes cheaper, so that more people can have access to it. And that would continue to build on programs like IRA, but make it accessible to Puerto Rico too, right? And that because these programs are key, right? They're key to driving access to it, to driving the market, to driving accessible services to low-income communities. And so this way we fill those gaps, and then no one stays, no one's left out.
Yeah, I think David and Ruth, hit the nail on the head. Solar plus storage is a sleeping giant. Decentralized access to power, I think, is just a huge opportunity in so many ways globally. And it can really just have such an incredible impact from top down, bottom up. And so I think it's going to be a huge kind of revolution in terms of energy access. And I think it's going to touch everything everywhere. And I just hope it happens sooner than later, because climate change, as we've seen, is really accelerating at a very dangerous rate. And solar and storage will help mitigate that. And so the more we can do, the better off we'll all be.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your really insightful responses, and thank you everyone for submitting these really great questions as well. We'll have on the screen in just a moment our upcoming webinars. Perfect. We have energy storage interconnection, huge issue. We talked a bit about interconnection just in the Q&A section. That will be next week, May 21st. And then we have a Batteries 101 Part 2 edition on May 30th. You can find the Batteries 101 Part 1 on our website recording. As we said at the top of the hour, the recording from today's webinar will be sent out to everyone's emails sometime this week, as well as the slides and full bio handouts. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and thank you again to our really, really great panelists. Thank you all.
Thank you.